Thanks everybody for coming. I'm Steve Wilson from Sydney. First time on a plane for 3 years, so it's fantastic to be back. Point of clarification, I'm not talking about the market failure of identity, which would just be stupid in the company of Ping Identity and all of our friends that are doing well with identity services. And of course, there's also the idea that billions of dollars are changing hands for things like Twitter because of an identity play. So clearly, identity is a commercial success. The standard model of identity, the idea of identity providers providing something that can't be provided, has turned out to be an abject market failure, and it's something that we're not learning from, and that's what I want to drill into. Mr. AV chap, somebody was here. I can hear a lot of noise, but that doesn't mean anything. Well, I don't know if I can shout or not. There's a standard model. I want to get a bit sort of analytical about this. There's a standard model. There's a way that we frame digital identity, and it's been with us ever since the late, great Kim Cameron gave us the laws of identity. Identity providers, subjects or users of services, subjects of identity, identified people, end users, and identity providers, the three players. People that lawyers would describe as first party to the business, second party the customer, and a trusted third party that's trying to tell both of those first and second parties something that helps them be able to deal with each other. Also implicit in this is a metaphor that identity is a substance, identity is a thing, identity is provided, it's consumed, it's used, it's shared, as if it's a thing. And that's a metaphor that runs deep and it's very significant. Now, that was Microsoft in 2005. All of us ever since 2005. The language has been refreshed recently by the self-sovereign identity movement. We have issuers of credentials that are held, and the credentials are verified by the relying party. It's still the first party, second party, trusted third party. It is the same metaphor that identity is some sort of merchantable good, something's just been boosted, that runs through this. It's all based on this tacit assumption. I hope I'm not too loud now. There's just no foldback here, so I don't know what's happening. Good, thank you. There's a tacit assumption that identity is a thing. And it's a false intuition. It's a bit like the geocentric model of the solar system from hundreds of years ago. It makes such good sense, and it's wrong. And it's manifestly wrong. The evidence is around us that the standard model is failing, while people are still making a lot of money out of single sign-on and cloud identity and what have you. So it was complicated too by two important factors. One of them is that the laws of identity taught everybody that you're an identity provider because it allowed for any claim or set of claims to be a digital identity. So there was a wild goose chase. Banks around the world, banks in particular, were told, hey, you guys are identity providers. There is an explicit business opportunity for you to take these identities and federate them beyond your domain. And it was a wild goose chase. An extraordinary amount of time was spent on that one. Secondly, we did in fact start to see success of the federation plumbing. So we probably all saw Andre speak a few hours ago, and he called out the success of SAML and OIDC and OAuth. These things are fantastic. They are baked in, and they enable social logon. They enable Twitter and Facebook and all of those good things that we all use pretty seamlessly. And that sort of false intuition that things are quite easy powered things like NSTIC. Now, NSTIC, that was from Howard Schultz, the chief security advisor to, Howard Schwartz rather, chief security advisor to the Obama White House. And his vision was that a student could take an identity from her telco or from her bank and use them to log on and do her exams and check her health records. That is a radical jump from how social logon works And nobody ever said, or nobody ever reflected that social log-on is seamless because the social identity provider doesn't know who you are and the relying party doesn't care who you are. So of course it's frictionless. And it's propelled by surveillance capitalism and eyeballs and customer acquisition. So the idea that serious identity, in air quotes, could be modelled on that social experience was incredibly naive. Even before NSTIC, I've got a paper that goes back to the year 2000 from the UK government, where they expressly had a policy position to let the market decide digital identity. It was the same in Australia. It was the same in the US. So it was a rallying call. A lot of us in the room would remember, a lot of us were there working at IDSG. The private sector was going to lead identity, and there was going to be a choice. That's the other thing. The market expectation was that it would generate choice through market forces of supply and demand of these digital identities. At the same time, governance took off as an industry in its own right, and so a happy place for identity governance is the trust framework. The trust framework, the people in this room who are responsible for this, is a great piece of work. Thank you, Eve. 2010, really interesting piece of work. The Open Identity Trust Foundation. It inspired New Zealand and Canada and Australia. And there were so many trust frameworks by 2015 that Kantara did a stocktake and found 103 of them. So now, much more recently, OIX has found common standard elements, 30 different elements in trust frameworks around the world, and they've written a master work to try and standardise trust frameworks. The first thing that anybody tells you in a trust framework presentation is that the world is full of trust frameworks. But it's our happy place. We just keep churning them out. I think the urgent problem is to do a better analog to digital conversion of all the trust frameworks that we've already got. Because what's happening is that we're losing our binding. We've got trust frameworks, we've got roles and responsibilities, we've got rules. But when they get digitised, we lose the binding and we lose the fidelity. So these are engineering problems: binding, fidelity, authenticity. Now, really, I'm going to use the paradigm word. And I'm a scientist by training and used to love the philosophy of science and read Thomas Kuhn. And strictly speaking, a paradigm is not just a way of looking at the world, but it's a set of model problems and model solutions. So they're habits. There are achievements for sure in our industry, and I'm going to come back to those at the end. But it's the model solution and the model problem that preoccupies us and that we don't talk about, or we don't reflect on it. So the model problem we've been solving for the reuse of identities, and that is federated identity. A lot of the problem dates back to the token necklace of the early 2000s. It's a human factors problem. The password is a technology that is purposefully difficult to use. It must be the only technology that is hard to use by design. It was designed for mainframe operators in the 1960s, and we have inflicted it on consumers in the internet thinking it would be all right. It's a human factors problem. We don't, for example, try and reuse car keys or house keys. I mean, it would be, how would you do that? Why would you even ask the question? So I think that we have had these model problems, model solutions, paradigm. I think the paradigm is shifting. A paradigm shift is normally called 10 or 20 years after the event. It's very difficult to pick one when you're in it, but there are clues around us. There are some paradoxes and there's some pretty stark contradictions in our industry that we should reflect on. You know the Fermi paradox? That if life is inevitable in the universe, then we should be surrounded by aliens. And some people think we are, but there is a Fermi paradox in the identity industry. If identity is such an urgent problem, and if identity providers are such a good idea, where are they? They just keep failing. All of those banks I talked about, I've worked for some of them, but 30 or 40 banks around the world tried to be IDPs and they all stopped. That's a paradox. Now here's the contradiction too. The most important developments in our industry today are nothing to do with identity. In fact, some of them walk back from identity. The FIDO Alliance, the most impactful initiative, standards initiative ever, kicking real goals, was founded expressly about authentication and not identity. The verifiable credentials work. Clearly it's not identity, it's credentials. The people that coach you about this technology talk about the difference between identity and credentials all the time, and the success is on the credentials side. And Apple wallets, you know, you're not going to be able to, well, you can put your COVID vaccination certificate in your driver's license on an Apple phone, but it's not your identity. You're not going to be able to walk through customs with that thing. So they're very, very clear about what it is. And of course that started from the virtual credit card, which is a very beautiful verifiable credential in the Apple wallet. So we're taking nice measured steps, but not identity steps. I don't know if Phil's here this week, but my good friend, everybody's good friend, Phil Winley, the godfather of self-sovereign identity, says, not accidentally, he says this over and over, that there is no artifact called identity in self-sovereign identity. It's all about relationships and credentials. We've had some of these technologies for a long time. We've had verifiable credentials in the form of SIM cards and chip and pin cards for at least 20 years. The idea that you could digitally sign an assertion, bind it to a key and allow somebody to cryptographically present that assertion again. We've had this technology for a long time. It's increasingly becoming compartmentalised or becoming dedicated to the task of presenting credentials. So identity is not what we thought it was. It's not that thing that you can provide and consume. Let's do a reality check. If Phil's right and it's all about credentials and relationships, well, who goes around federating relationships? Who tries to overcook credentials? I mean, I've got a very good accountant, but I don't let her do my root canal. And credentials are very specific. Like, she finds a hard time getting work in America because there's a different set of credential standards for accountants in this part of the world, and there should be. You know, credentials are sovereign. So we know this stuff, and the reality check would suggest to us that identity is not the right model, it's not the right word for the thing that we've been trying to solve for, and the thing that we're very good at. I mean, again, it bears repeating that identity is not a market failure. We're doing really well. But we're doing well at a problem that's been misframed, and that continues to distract us. So, what is it? Let's break it down. What is my identity? Usually it's just a name and CRN, which is to say that it's data. And then we have these other factors. Who are you? What do you have? What do you possess? What do you know? Biometrics, digital signatures, whole lot of plumbing, whole lot of protocols for delivering these facts and figures about people. But it's just more metadata. You know, digital signature is just a beautiful piece of metadata that tells you that this otherwise piece of naked data is actually bound to somebody with a private key. So that's pretty cool. It's metadata. And that's all we've got is data. Is it different in real life? Like, a lot of philosophers would tell you that it's not. Philosophers would tell you, you don't know me, all you know is data, sense data. But let's not go there. Let's stick to our knitting, which is digital identity. How do we work online? You know, it would have been coming to you over Zoom. It's just pixels. That's all we got. And digital identity can't be anything other than data. Now, I've been socialising this idea for a couple of years, and actually getting a lot of pushback and a lot of challenge and a lot of constructive discussions. My friends in the self-sovereign identity movement, the more libertarian friends of mine, think that I am being reductionist and that I am reducing the lived human experience of being on the internet. I'm not. That stuff is absolutely important, but what I'm trying to say is that it's all coming to you through data. And that's not to dehumanise it, it is to find common ground. Because every one of us, it should be more embarrassing, but every one of us knows that we've been struggling for 10 or 20 years just with bloody definitions. So why don't we stop wasting time? If it's the data, stupid, then let's reframe. What do you need to know about a counterparty in order to deal with them. Where are you going to get that data from, and how are you going to know that it's true? So I think that that is the design thinking, certainly from the relying party perspective, of the problem that we should be trying to solve. This, I think, should be the model problem. And we've got all of the stuff, good stuff. It's just not well framed, it's not clear. We've got identity in air quotes, but what that means is credentials and assertions and claims and attributes and all that sort of good stuff. We authenticate, we authorise, we do KYC. Cool. But it's all just data. We don't need to anthropomorphise it as identity. We don't need to inflate every possible claim and call it a digital identity. It didn't get us anywhere. Where are we going to get the data? So the lexicon, we're all using these terms all the time now, sources of truth. And there are registries and there are definitive things. So one of the most important things that happened in self-sovereign identity was that they clarified a few years ago that this is not about self-asserted sovereignty. This is about tools and verifiable credentials which allow for the sovereignty of the issuer, the third parties. So issuers and registries and importing, if you like, or recognising authorities within that self-sovereign ecosystem is bread and butter. It's super important. And how will you tell that it's true? This is where our work and our mission coalesces and merges really constructively with the entire thing about cyberspace at the moment. It's all about truth and cyberspace, truth and provenance and originality and some pretty difficult epiphenomena that we're trying to construct again. And I'm going to talk more about this on Thursday, where I've been honoured to be able to develop some of these ideas further into where we could be working, where we should be putting our energy as ID pros. So how are we going? Can we agree, and again, I'm not trying to be reductionist, but I am trying to find common ground. So can we agree that Alice and Bob online want to work out things about each other? And can we agree that there are primitive actions about data and signals, about data and metadata? What do you need to know about somebody and how will you know that it's true? I think we can agree on that. And then we might sort of stop wrapping ourselves around the axle about arbitrary bloody words that we've imported. We Identity have imported English words and then put them into glossaries and given them complicated definitions and tried to tell people that there's a difference between authenticate and verify. I mean, come on. We could avoid all that. So that's how I frame and see our industry's successes. We have really awesome tools. And they're really mature and they're becoming ubiquitous. And Fido in particular, Andrew and David Turner here, incredible work. And it's not just those guys, but almost everybody who's involved with that. Verifiable credentials. Digital wallets, taking that credit card and turning it into all sorts of things about me that can be presented using NFC technology. Wow. Happy to be getting rid of passwords. I think that we'll get rid of QR codes even quicker and replace it with NFC. So 18013, beautiful technology, probably premature to salute it just yet. I really hope that it's generalised beyond MDL to all sorts of other credentials. And of course, the information of things. These wallets are just key pairs in secure enclaves, and they're being automated and integrated into IoT devices so that a car and a government certifier could get verifiable warranty information about the car or a verifiable service history of the car. So the idea of using these verifiable credentials and automating them into things is fantastic. And think about the business opportunity. 50 times as many credentials to be issued to things as there are people. There's already, God help us, the phrase identity of things floating around, and I'm just really trying to avoid that one. We have screwed up the identity of flesh and blood people that have identities, and the idea of overcooking identity of inanimate objects just makes my head explode. So, we left the market to work out identity, and the market decided that there's no need for identity providers. I think that we should, for once, trust the invisible hand of the market and realise, the market's been trying to tell us for years, identity's not for sale, people. Go and do something else. So we've got a fantastic array of tools. They are ideally suited to some really urgent problems about provenance and truth of what's happening online, ideally suited for determining authorship and making authorship machine readable. And we've got a long way to go, but we've got the tools. And we know that data processing is a thing, an infrastructure that runs deep through society. We know that data is big business, for good or for bad. We need to make it more transparent business. We need to make it more reliable business by using these tools to improve the reliability of data, because society needs this thing. So let's repurpose, let's reframe, and let's use these tools that we've got for that bigger purpose. Thank you. I reckon we've got 3 minutes before people should start moving to other rooms, and we don't have any chairing or any sort of ceremony or protocol up here, so I'm going to loiter for a minute, and if I don't see a hand, I'm going to hand you over to Andrew Shikia. Yeah, Steve Panifer.
Yes.
Hi.
Silly observation and then a more serious question. So silly observation, ID for IoT, idiot. Second, the more serious question is you talked about first party, second party and third party, but it's a two-way thing, right? So there's really kind of two first party.
Yeah.
This is, we've been for years, I think, the term relying party has been a problem because it assumes it's all one direction.
What are they relying on? Yep.
Both parties are relying parties.
Yep.
Right? I want to know who the service provider is just as much as they want to know who I am.
So call me reductionist, but I think what's happening there is that there are two one-way things going on.
Yeah.
I actually think that mutual authentication and business relationships and how do I know it's really the bank when they over-authenticate me, all of that stuff, I get it. But I don't think mutual authentication is a two-way thing. I think what's happening is there are two one-way authentications. And again, I think that idea of framing it in terms of what do you need to know, where you're going to get it, how do you know that it's true, that helps you decompose those two things, because the stuff that the bank needs to know about me is completely, foundationally different from what I need to know about the bank.
I think that language, we had it correct in PKR. You've got the subject of the right party,
Yep.
and it doesn't distinguish about the type of person, the type of organisation that it is.
Yeah, I think neutralising it is helpful. Yeah, depersonalising it. Subject, people have told me, subject's reductionist as well, but it's like the subject of a grammar construction, the subject of a sentence. That's pretty neutral. I don't think that's objectionable. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, missed you.
So it sounds like the idea is that identity providers, they were disparate. I mean, I know there's some that are more prevalent than others, Facebook and Google and stuff like that, but they're not everywhere. And it seems like that's the problem, is there's not like one centralized. So when Andre, for instance, talked about show card, I guess how do you get everybody to adopt this type of framework or this type of idea, so that way we don't have these disparate data stores and disparate sets of identity?
I think that we would be more orderly about all those disparate things, and the ecosystem would become more orderly if we just stepped back and thought about it and reframed the question. We should not start with identity. I think as a matter of design thinking, if you and I was to sit down and develop a whole new health system and it had to be secure, I don't think that our design thinking would start with identity. In fact, a privacy person would say, please introduce identity as late as you can. So I'm not suggesting that we do anything different technologically. I'm suggesting that we reframe the problem that we're trying to solve. At every opportunity when we have new design tasks, try and follow that new pattern, keep using the tools that we've got, and communicate the tools in a better way. Because what does frustrate me is that the trust framework fashion is occupying so much time. The Australian government is in its 4th iteration in 7 years of the Trusted Digital Identity Framework. My God, it's just such a waste of time. And it's unnecessary if we break it down. We don't need to be solving for identity, because that, certainly in my country, inevitably slides into national identity. So that's another point. The word identity is such a distraction that most people who have not been doing this for 25 years think that we're talking about national identity. And I mean, a lot of people are nodding, but how much time do we waste talking to politicians and privacy advocates trying to assure them that we identirati are not trying to, barcode every human being with digital tattoos? But the distraction's in the name of the game that we're playing. Thank you. Andrew.